The explosion rocked the charity gala, but it wasn't a bomb. It was champagne. The cork from a $100,000 bottle of Dom Perignon shot across the opulent ballroom of the Hastings Hotel, narrowly missing the chandelier before landing, directly in socialite Victoria Marlowe's cleavage. "Oh my God!" Victoria shrieked, champagne fountaining over her designer dress. All eyes turned toward her, including those of Atlas Sterling, the enigmatic billionaire standing motionless at the far end of the room. Atlas didn't laugh. Atlas didn't smile. Atlas didn't speak. He never did. Victoria stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter who sent a tray of canapes sailing through the air like tiny edible frisbees. One landed perfectly on the bald head of Senator Williams, who was too engrossed in his phone to notice. "I am so sorry," Victoria gushed, dabbing frantically at her dress with a cocktail napkin. "This was vintage Valentino, a priceless piece from my grandmother's collection." It wasn't. She'd bought it that morning at a consignment shop for $80. The tag was still tucked under her arm. Atlas Sterling observed the chaos with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything, including the price tag now peeking out from Victoria's armpit. His bodyguard and interpreter, Harrison, leaned down as Atlas's hands moved in a flurry of sign language. "Mr. Sterling wishes to know if you're all right, Miss..." Harrison's deep voice carried across the now hushed room. "Marlowe. Victoria Marlowe," she replied, straightening her spine and trying to reclaim some dignity. "I'm the new head of development at the Children's Literacy Foundation." She wasn't. She'd sneaked into the gala using a borrowed invitation and had never worked a day at any foundation. Atlas's hands moved again. "Mr. Sterling says he's a major donor to the foundation and is surprised they never mentioned your appointment," Harrison translated, his expression neutral, but his eyes suspicious. Victoria felt sweat beading on her forehead. "It's very recent. Just last week, actually. I haven't even had business cards printed." She forced a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup. Atlas stared at her for what felt like eternity. His face, unreadable. Then his hands moved in elegant, precise gestures. "Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you privately about your foundation work," Harrison said. "He has a proposition that might interest you." The crowd had already returned to their champagne and gossip, but Victoria felt as if she were still center stage. This wasn't part of her plan. She'd come to network, maybe charm a wealthy donor into funding her imaginary fashion startup. Not to have a one-on-one with the Atlas Sterling, the reclusive tech genius whose voice hadn't been heard since a traumatic incident in his youth. "I'd be delighted," she lied, following Atlas and Harrison to a secluded alcove. Inside, Atlas dismissed Harrison with a wave. When they were alone, he pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. "I know you're not with the foundation." Victoria's heart stopped. "I don't know what you mean." He typed again, blue eyes never leaving her face. "I also know you've crashed 3 other charity events this month. You told Mr. Rothschild you were developing sustainable housing in Ecuador. You told Mrs. Vandermeer you were researching rare diseases in children. How could you possibly..." "I own the security company that handles all major events in this city. Facial recognition. Very effective." Victoria's mind raced. Prison, public humiliation, lawsuits. Atlas typed again, his expression softening slightly. "I'm not going to expose you. I have a proposition. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Victoria swallowed hard. What kind of arrangement? His thumbs moved across the screen, and when he turned it toward her, Victoria's jaw dropped. A marriage. "Contract. 1 year. 10 million. No romantic entanglements. I need a wife for business reasons. You need money. Simple transaction." The phone screen blurred as Victoria tried to process his words. $10 million. For 1 year of pretending to be the wife of a man who never spoke. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have anyone." Atlas's fingers flew across the screen. "Because you're clearly an excellent liar." And sometimes that's exactly what business requires. As Victoria stared into Atlas's intense blue eyes, she realized that in all her cons and schemes, she'd never expected to become someone else's elaborate deception. And she'd certainly never expected the silent man before her to see through her so completely, or to find it valuable. Outside the alcove, the gala continued in all its glittering splendor, while inside, two strangers contemplated a contract built on mutual dishonesty and 10 million reasons to say yes. Atlas extended his hand. Victoria hesitated only for a moment, before shaking it. The explosion that had begun the evening was nothing compared to the bomb they'd just set ticking. Victoria. Marlowe sat across from Atlas Sterling in his penthouse office, 60 floors above Manhattan. The contract between them was thicker than a Russian novel, and probably less romantic. "Let me get this straight," she said, flipping through the pages. "I have to attend business dinners, charity functions, and family gatherings as your loving wife, but we'll maintain separate bedrooms in your mansion?" Atlas nodded, his fingers dancing across his tablet before turning it toward her. "Separate. Wings, actually. The east wing is yours. It has its own pool." "Of course it does," Victoria muttered. The morning sun glinted off the diamond-crusted watch on Atlas's wrist, a timepiece that probably cost more than all the lies she'd ever told combined. Harrison stood by the window, his broad shoulders blocking out half the skyline. "Mr. Sterling, would like to emphasize that discretion is paramount. No one can know this is a business arrangement." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Not even your family?" Atlas's jaw tightened. He typed quickly. "Especially not my family. My grandmother is dying. Her last wish is to see me settled with someone who makes me happy. The family company bylaws state that only a married Sterling can take full control of Sterling Innovations. So I'm helping you fulfill an old lady's dying wish and secure your corporate takeover?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, a leather throne that probably cost more than her apartment. "That's cold, even by my standards." Atlas didn't flinch. His blue eyes remained steady as he typed. "We all lie to get what we want. I'm just being honest about my dishonesty." Victoria couldn't argue with that logic. She'd lied her way through 3 continents and several identities. The difference was, she'd never had $10 million waiting at the finish line. "What's my background story?" she asked, suddenly all business. "You've clearly done your homework on me. You know, I can't actually be Victoria Marlowe, former head of the Children's Literacy Foundation." Harrison cleared his throat. "We've created an extensive background. You'll be Victoria Sterling, née Marlowe, a philanthropist who spent the past 5 years doing humanitarian work abroad, primarily in regions with limited internet access. That explains your minimal digital footprint." Victoria laughed despite herself. "Clever?" Atlas's hands moved in a sequence of signs directed at Harrison. "Mr. Sterling says you'll have 3 weeks to learn sign language basics, his family history, and the details of your fabricated past together," Harrison translated. "The story is that you met during your humanitarian work in Bali last year, when Mr. Sterling was funding a technological initiative for underprivileged communities." Victoria nodded, absorbing the information. "And what happens if I slip up? Say something that contradicts your carefully crafted narrative?" Atlas typed, "That's why I chose someone skilled at improvisation. When you told Mr. Rothschild you were developing sustainable housing in Ecuador, you mentioned specific building materials that actually are used there. You do your research. I appreciate thoroughness in deception." She couldn't tell if that was a compliment or an insult. Maybe both. "And after 1 year?" Victoria asked. Harrison stepped forward. "An amicable divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. You'll sign an NDA and receive the balance of your payment." Victoria flipped to the last page of the contract. "Only half up front?" Atlas's expression remained impassive as he typed. "Trust works both ways." There was something oddly refreshing about negotiating with someone who acknowledged the transactional nature of their relationship. No false pretenses. No romantic illusions. Victoria picked up the pen, a Mont Blanc that probably cost more than her last car, and twirled it between her fingers. What about your voice? If we're married, wouldn't I know why you don't speak? The atmosphere in the room chilled by several degrees. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. After a long pause, Atlas typed, "Traumatic incident at age 12. Psychosomatic. Physically capable, but psychologically unable. You know this. Respect it. And never pressure me about it." That's in section 23, paragraph 4. Victoria nodded, feeling like she'd accidentally stepped on a landmine in this field of deception. "I understand." She signed her name with a flourish that didn't match the tremor in her hand. As the pen lifted from the paper, she felt a strange sense of fate sealing itself around her. Atlas signed too, his movements precise and controlled. Then he pushed across a small velvet box. Inside was a ring that made Victoria gasp involuntarily. The diamond caught the morning light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows across the room. "Is this real?" she whispered. Atlas typed, "Everything about our relationship will be fake except the legality of our marriage and the authenticity of that 8-carat diamond." As Victoria slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, which was either romantic or terrifying in its precision, Harrison handed her a credit card and a phone. "Your new identity starts now," he said. "The Sterling private jet leaves for the family estate in Newport at 3 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling is eager to meet her new granddaughter-in-law." Victoria's eyes widened. "Today? We're meeting your grandmother today?" Atlas stood, straightening his impeccable suit. His hands moved in fluid signs that Harrison translated. "Mr. Sterling says, 'Welcome to the family business, Mrs. Sterling. I hope you're as good at being a wife as you are at being a liar.'" As Atlas left the room, Victoria stared down at the diamond glinting on her finger. A beautiful stone formed under extreme pressure. Much like the situation she now found herself in. The contract sat on the table between them. 156 pages of fine print that would change her life. What the contract couldn't specify, however, was how to pretend to love a man who communicated everything except emotion. Victoria had lied about many things in her life. Her identity, her accomplishments, her past. But she'd never had to lie about love. That, she suspected, would be the most challenging performance of her career. The Sterling family estate in Newport made Downton Abbey look like a starter home. Victoria gazed out the limousine window at a manicured gardens that stretched toward the Atlantic Ocean. Emerald lawns dotted with marble fountains and topiary sculptures cut with mathematical precision. "You grew up here?" she whispered to Atlas, who sat beside her, tapping away on his phone. He glanced up and nodded once, then returned to his screen. "It's a prison with better landscaping." The cryptic response hung between them as the car crunched up the gravel driveway. Victoria had spent the 3-hour flight memorizing the Sterling family tree, a tangled web of old money, strategic marriages, and enough skeletons to fill the cemetery she could see nestled on a distant hill. "Remember," Harrison murmured from the front seat. "Mrs. Eleanor Sterling is particularly interested in how you met. She's a romantic at heart." Victoria felt her pulse quicken. The Bali story, humanitarian work. Got it. Atlas's hand unexpectedly covered hers. When she looked at him in surprise, he pointed to her naked ring finger. With a gasp, Victoria fumbled in her purse for the enormous diamond she'd removed to avoid airline theft. She slipped it on just as the car rolled to a stop. The front door of the mansion swung open, and a line of staff emerged, followed by a slender woman in her mid-30s, whose smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's Cordelia, Atlas's cousin," Harrison whispered. "She's next in line for CEO if your marriage doesn't work out." "Terrific," Victoria muttered, plastering on her brightest smile. Atlas exited first, then extended his hand to help Victoria out. His touch was warm and firm, his expression inscrutable. For a fleeting second, Victoria wondered what his voice might sound like if he could speak. Would it match his imperious bearing? Or would it betray something softer beneath? "Atlas, darling." Cordelia air-kissed both his cheeks. "And this must be the mysterious bride we've heard absolutely nothing about." Victoria stepped forward, channeling every society wife she'd ever observed. "Victoria Marlowe Sterling," she said, offering her hand. "Though I hardly feel mysterious, just lucky." Cordelia's handshake was a vice grip. "How fortuitous that you and Atlas found each other just when the company bylaws required him to marry. Almost miraculous timing, wouldn't you say?" Atlas's jaw tightened. His hands moved rapidly in sign language. Victoria, surprising even herself, responded in sign. Fate works in mysterious ways. The shock on both Atlas and Cordelia's faces was worth the intensive 3-hour sign language crash course she'd taken on the plane. "You sign?" Cordelia's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Victoria smiled. "I'm still learning. But when you love someone, you learn to speak their language." She reached for Atlas's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Isn't that right, darling?" Atlas's blue eyes widened slightly before he nodded, a barely perceptible softening in his expression. "How touching," Cordelia said, her voice brittle as thin ice. "Grandmother is waiting in the solarium. She's having a good day, but don't tire her." As they followed Cordelia through the mansion's cavernous halls, Victoria whispered to Atlas, "Your cousin seems lovely. Does she always sharpen her claws before family gatherings, or is that just for me?" Atlas's shoulders shook in what might have been silent laughter. He quickly typed on his phone and showed her. "Cordelia was CEO in waiting until you appeared. Now she has to smile while plotting your downfall. The family tradition." "Wonderful," Victoria muttered. "No pressure." The solarium was a cathedral of glass and iron, filled with exotic plants and the soft tinkling of a water feature. At its center, seated like a queen on a wicker throne, was Eleanor Sterling. Despite being in her 90s, Eleanor radiated the kind of authority that made even Atlas straighten his posture. Her silver hair was styled immaculately, her frail frame draped in a cashmere wrap, but it was her eyes, the same piercing blue as Atlas's, that commanded attention. "So," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly strong, "you're the woman who accomplished what an army of debutantes could not." Victoria felt Atlas tense beside her. This was it, the performance of her life. "Mrs. Sterling," Victoria said, approaching the elderly woman and taking her thin hand gently. "I've heard so much about you. Atlas speaks of you with such admiration." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Does he now?" "In his fashion, I suppose." She patted the seat beside her. "Sit, child. Tell me how my silent grandson managed to woo you." Victoria sat, arranging her face into what she hoped was the expression of a woman in love. "Actually, I fell in love with his words first." Behind her, she heard Cordelia make a skeptical noise. "His words?" Eleanor asked, intrigued. "Atlas may not speak aloud, but he's eloquent in every other way," Victoria explained, the lie flowing smoothly. "We met in Bali, where I was coordinating clean water initiatives. Atlas was funding a technology center nearby. He sent me notes, handwritten at first. His penmanship is beautiful, did you know?" Atlas, standing behind his grandmother's chair, raised an eyebrow. "We spent evenings on the beach, and he would write messages in the sand," Victoria continued, warming to her story. "Sometimes the tide would come in before I could read them all, and he'd laugh, silently, of course, as I tried to decipher the words before they washed away." Eleanor's face softened. "That sounds like the boy I raised. Careful with spoken words, extravagant with written ones. She turned to Atlas. You should have told us about her sooner. Atlas's hands moved in sign language, which Harrison translated. From the doorway. Some treasures you keep to yourself until you're ready to share them. Victoria felt a strange flutter in her chest. For a practiced liar, Atlas was surprisingly poetic. And you, my dear. Eleanor turned back to Victoria, her gaze sharpening. What made you fall for a man of so few words when most young women want nothing but empty promises and flowery speeches? Victoria didn't need to invent an answer. It came to her with unexpected clarity. Because silence leaves room for truth, she said quietly. Atlas doesn't waste words. Everything he expresses, he means. In a world of noise and nonsense, that's rare. She looked up at Atlas, whose expression had gone completely still. And valuable. For a moment, the solarium was quiet, except for the gentle bubbling of the fountain. Then Eleanor clapped her hands once. Well, at last, a woman with sense. She nodded approvingly. The wedding will be held here, of course, next weekend. Victoria nearly choked. Next weekend? But I'm 93, child, Eleanor interrupted. Every day is a gift I didn't order and can't return. I want to see my grandson married before I have to leave the party. She reached up to pat Atlas's hand. You don't mind indulging an old woman, do you? Atlas's face revealed nothing, but his hand signed a response that Harrison translated, Nothing would please me more, grandmother. As the elderly matriarch began enthusiastically discussing wedding plans with a shell-shocked Victoria, Atlas's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Expedited timeline complicates things. Contract may need revision. Atlas glanced at Victoria, who was nodding along to Eleanor's suggestions for flower arrangements, while shooting him a panicked look that screamed, Help me. He texted back, Proceed as planned. Add wedding bonus too. Contract. Across the room, Cordelia watched the scene with narrowed eyes, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on her champagne flute. Victoria felt trapped in a whirlwind she couldn't control. She'd agreed to a year of pretend marriage, not a rushed wedding with real vows, and Eleanor Sterling's shrewd gaze evaluating her every move. As their eyes met across the solarium, Atlas gave her the smallest nod, part apology, part encouragement. In that moment, Victoria realized that despite the contract between them, they were now truly in this charade together. For better or worse. Mostly worse. We can't possibly pull this off, Victoria hissed, pacing the perimeter of Atlas's childhood bedroom. It was larger than her entire apartment, with antique furniture that probably belonged in a museum and views of the Atlantic, that belonged on a postcard. A wedding in 7 days? I barely know your middle name. Atlas, seated at his desk, typed on his tablet. Nathaniel, Atlas Nathaniel Sterling III. Now you know. Hilarious, Victoria said, running her hands through her hair. Your grandmother wants a full society wedding. Cordelia looks at me like I'm something she found stuck to her stiletto. And I have to convince everyone I'm madly in love with a man I met 3 days ago. Atlas raised an eyebrow and typed again. You convinced my grandmother you fell in love with messages I wrote in the sand. Very creative. I didn't know I was so romantic. Despite her panic, Victoria felt her lips twitch toward a smile. It was the best I could improvise. Who knew Eleanor? Sterling was such a sucker for a beach romance? Atlas's shoulders shook in his version of laughter. He stood and moved to the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening sky. After a moment, he turned and signed slowly, making sure Victoria could follow. Thank you. Grandmother hasn't looked that happy in years. Victoria's irritation softened. She loves you very much. Atlas nodded, then typed. She raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 10. The same accident that... He gestured to his throat. Then, shook his head and continued typing. She's the only person who never tried to make me speak again. Victoria sat on the edge of the massive four-poster bed, suddenly aware she was seeing a side of Atlas the business world never did. Is that why you need to secure the company? For her? Atlas's expression shuddered. He turned back to the window, hands clasped behind his back. After a long moment, he typed without looking at her. Sterling Innovations was her husband's legacy. My grandfather built it from nothing. Cordelia's father, my uncle, nearly destroyed it with risky ventures. I rebuilt it. Eleanor deserves to see it in safe hands before she dies. Victoria absorbed this information, seeing new dimensions to their arrangement. And the whole must-be-married clause in the company bylaws? Atlas's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. Grandfather's idea. He believed unmarried men made reckless business decisions. A man needs someone to come home to if he's to build something worth leaving behind. Surprisingly romantic. For a corporate titan, Victoria observed. He loved my grandmother until his last breath. Their marriage was his proudest achievement, not the company. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Their own marriage would be nothing like that. A business transaction with an expiration date. Harrison knocked and entered with an armful of binders. Wedding preparations, he announced, dropping them on the bed. The Sterling events team has been activated. They're treating this like a military operation. Of course they are, Victoria muttered. You have a dress fitting tomorrow morning, Harrison continued. Family brunch at 11. The Sterling Foundation charity gala tomorrow night. Your first public appearance as a couple. Victoria groaned and flopped back on the bed. I need a drink. Atlas's hands moved in a quick sign that didn't need translation. He opened a panel, in the wall revealing a well-stocked bar. As Atlas poured 3 glasses of scotch, Harrison cleared his throat. There's another issue. Photographers have already gathered at the gates. Word of Atlas Sterling's sudden engagement has leaked. Victoria sat up. What? How? Harrison grimaced. Cordelia posted congratulations on her social media, tagged both. Of you. Very thoughtful of her. Atlas's expression darkened. He set down the scotch decanter with deliberate care. So she's forcing our hand, Victoria realized. Making sure there's public pressure for the wedding to proceed. Atlas nodded grimly. You'll need to be prepared for questions, Harrison said. About your relationship, your background. Everything we created must hold up to scrutiny. Victoria accepted the scotch Atlas handed her, their fingers brushing momentarily. I don't even know how you take your coffee. Atlas signed something and Harrison translated. Black. No sugar. See? Victoria pointed accusingly. Basic husband information. Atlas sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. He pulled out his phone and began typing a list, showing it to her when finished. 1. I take coffee black. I'm allergic to shellfish. 3. I sleep on the left side of the bed. I hate opera but love ballet. 5. I can't stand cilantro. 6. I read poetry. Before sleeping 7. My favorite color is green, not blue. Despite what everyone assumes, Victoria read the list, then looked up at him with a small smile. That's helpful, actually. She took a deep breath and added, I take my coffee with cream, no sugar. I'm not allergic to anything except bad liars. I sleep in the middle of the bed, spread out like a starfish. I cry at commercials with dogs in them. I can't whistle. I'm terrified of heights but love roller coasters, which makes no sense. And my favorite color is yellow, the kind at sunrise, not the neon kind. Atlas's eyes crinkled at the corners, almost a smile. He typed, Progress. Now we're practically soulmates. Victoria laughed despite herself, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Harrison cleared his throat. There's more. He pulled out his tablet and brought up a spreadsheet. You'll need to know Atlas's schedule, preferences, habits, and Victoria. We need to finalize your background story. For the next 3 hours, they constructed Victoria's life history, filling in gaps, creating photographs of her humanitarian work, courtesy of Sterling Innovations' graphics department, and drilling Atlas on key details of their fabricated courtship. By midnight, Victoria's head was spinning with information, and even Atlas looked exhausted. We should practice, Harrison said suddenly. Victoria, sprawled in an armchair, raised her head. Practice what? Being in love, Harrison replied matter-of-factly. You'll be expected to show affection. It should look natural. Victoria and Atlas exchanged an alarmed glance. You mean like kissing? Victoria asked, her cheeks warming inexplicably. Harrison shrugged. Among other things, couples have patterns, how they sit together, casual touches, inside jokes. You two move like business associates, not lovers. Atlas's hands moved in sharp, definitive signs. Mr. Sterling says that won't be necessary, Harrison translated, looking uncomfortable. He believes you can both act convincingly when required. Victoria nodded quickly, ignoring the strange flutter of, was it disappointment? Surely not. Exactly, she agreed. We're both professionals at deception. Harrison looked unconvinced, but didn't push the issue. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be intense. After he left, Victoria and Atlas sat in awkward silence. Finally, Atlas typed, You should take the bed. I'll use the adjoining room. As he moved to leave, Victoria called after him. Atlas? He turned, one eyebrow raised. Thank you, she said softly, for trusting me with this. I know it's not just about the company, it's about your grandmother. Something shifted in Atlas's expression. A softening around the eyes. A vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He nodded once, then signed something she didn't understand before leaving. Alone in his childhood bedroom, Victoria wandered to the bookshelves, running her fingers along leather-bound spines. On the lowest shelf, half hidden behind modern business texts, she found a worn copy of poetry with dog-eared pages and handwritten notes in the margins. She opened it, surprised to find a child's handwriting that gradually matured through the book. The final notes made in a strong, masculine hand she recognized from Atlas's rare handwritten memos. Victoria read a few of the marked passages, seeing Atlas through the poetry he'd loved across his silent years. The verses were full of longing, beauty, and unexpressed emotion. As she carefully returned the book and climbed into his childhood bed, Victoria realized she'd uncovered something the contract hadn't specified. Atlas Sterling had a heart beneath his corporate armor, and somehow that made their charade seem both easier and infinitely more complicated. Tomorrow they would face the world as a love-struck couple. Tonight, she fell asleep wondering what Harrison had tactfully avoided translating when Atlas signed his final message. You look stunning. Harrison's voice broke through Victoria's anxious thoughts as she stared at her reflection in the three-way mirror. The gown, a Vera Wang creation that had materialized overnight, hugged her curves before cascading to the floor in waves of ivory silk. It's beautiful, she agreed, turning to watch the fabric swirl around her. But this is all happening so fast. The dress fitting, the press waiting outside, the charity gala tonight. Harrison adjusted his tie. Mr. Sterling believes in efficiency. Efficiency, Victoria repeated with a hollow laugh. Is that what we're calling this whirlwind of deception? Before Harrison could respond, the boutique door chimed, and Victoria turned to see Cordelia Sterling enter, looking immaculate in a power suit that probably cost more than Victoria's former apartment. Practicing for the big day? Cordelia asked, her smile shark-like. How committed of you? Victoria straightened her spine. Cordelia, what a surprise. I thought I'd join my future cousin-in-law for some girl time. Cordelia said, circling Victoria like a predator. That dress is exquisite, though I'm surprised you didn't bring your mother to help choose it. Family is so important at times, like these. Victoria felt a pang. Her fabricated background included parents who worked internationally, conveniently unreachable for the wedding. My parents are in a remote part of Madagascar, Victoria replied smoothly. Limited connectivity. How unfortunate, Cordelia murmured. And your friends. Surely some of your humanitarian colleagues could attend. Victoria maintained her smile while mentally thanking Atlas for the comprehensive background they'd created. Most are still in the field, but a few will make it. Cordelia nodded, running her manicured fingers along a rack of veils. Tell me, Victoria, how did a woman with no digital footprint, no verified employment history, and no apparent connections to any legitimate charitable organization capture the heart of America's most eligible bachelor? Harrison stepped forward. Ms. Sterling. It's fine, Harrison, Victoria interrupted, then turned to Cordelia. You seem very interested in my background, Cordelia. Professional curiosity or just protecting family interests? Cordelia's smile never wavered. Both, perhaps. Sterling Innovations is a global technology leader with government contracts and billions in assets. Atlas's wife would have access to sensitive information. The board has concerns about me specifically, or would they have investigated any woman Atlas chose? Victoria countered. Any gold digger who appeared out of nowhere a month before a critical board transition, Cordelia said, dropping all pretense. Atlas may be brilliant with business, but he's always been emotionally stunted. Easy prey for someone like you. The boutique door chimed again, and Atlas himself entered, stopping short at the tableau before him. Victoria in her wedding gown, Cordelia looking triumphant, and Harrison appearing deeply uncomfortable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Atlas's eyes locked with Victoria's, and something passed between them. A silent communication born of mutual conspiracy. Atlas's hands moved in fluid signs. I came to take you to lunch, Harrison translated awkwardly. You look beautiful. Victoria felt her cheeks warm with genuine pleasure, which annoyed her. This was an act, wasn't it? Atlas, Cordelia purred, kissing her cousin's cheek. I was just getting to know your bride better. Did you know the foundation she claims to have worked for has no record of her employment? Atlas didn't flinch. He signed rapidly, his expression calm. The Marlowe Foundation is Victoria's private charity, Harrison translated. Named after her family. Of course, there's no public employment record. Victoria fought to keep her face neutral. This was news to her. Cordelia's smile tightened. How convenient. Well, I look forward to learning more about it at the gala tonight. Perhaps you could introduce me to some of your beneficiaries. Before Victoria could respond, Atlas stepped between them, signing again. Victoria's work speaks for itself, Harrison translated. Unlike some who need to tear others down to feel accomplished. Cordelia's face flushed. Always the protective knight, Atlas. It would be admirable if it weren't so predictable. She gathered her purse. See you tonight, lovebirds. I've invited some special guests who are dying to meet the new Mrs. Sterling. After she left, Victoria collapsed onto a boutique sofa, the wedding dress pooling around her. She's investigating me, and she's invited people to the gala who can expose me. Atlas knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. He pulled out his phone and typed, Cordelia's predictable. I've already created the Marlowe Foundation. Backdated records, website, beneficiary testimonials. Launched this morning. Victoria's eyes widened. You created an entire foundation overnight? Atlas's eyes crinkled at the corners. He typed, Money has its uses. Also, I donated $50 million to it. Congratulations. You're a legitimate philanthropist now. Victoria stared. at him in disbelief, then began to laugh. A real, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise them both. "You're unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. $50 million just to spite your cousin?" Atlas typed, "To protect our arrangement. And you." Something warm bloomed in Victoria's chest, which she quickly tamped down. This was business, not personal. Even if Atlas Sterling was turning out to be far more intriguing than she'd initially thought. The Sterling Foundation Charity Gala transformed the Newport Mansion's ballroom into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors, while the elite of East Coast society mingled in their finest attire. Victoria, dressed in a midnight blue gown that highlighted the spectacular engagement ring, stood at Atlas's side, playing her role with practiced charm. 3 days ago, she'd been crashing charity events. Tonight, she was hosting one. "Atlas hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening," Eleanor observed, appearing beside Victoria at the champagne fountain. "I've never seen him so attentive to anyone." Victoria glanced across the room, finding Atlas watching her indeed, his gaze intense even from a distance. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. "He's special," Victoria said softly, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Eleanor patted her hand. "You know, when Atlas stopped speaking after the accident, the doctors said he might never connect with people normally again. Too traumatized. Too withdrawn." She looked toward her grandson with fierce pride. "They didn't understand that sometimes the quietest people have the most to say. You did. That's why he loves you." Guilt twisted in Victoria's stomach. "Eleanor." "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia's voice rang out over the microphone. "As Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Innovations, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our annual gala." Victoria tensed. Atlas appeared at her side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "This year is especially significant," Cordelia continued, "with my cousin Atlas's unexpected engagement." Her smile was razor sharp. "In fact, we're honored to have several special guests joining us tonight." Atlas's body went rigid beside Victoria. "Please welcome Mr. James Harrington, Director of Global Initiatives at the International Humanitarian Coalition," Cordelia announced. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped forward, scanning the crowd curiously. Victoria's blood ran cold. The International Humanitarian Coalition coordinated with major charitable foundations worldwide. If anyone could expose her fraudulent background, it would be someone in Harrington's position. "Breathe," Atlas signed to her, his expression calm. "Trust me." As Harrington approached, Victoria braced herself for humiliation. But to her shock, he broke into a warm smile. "Ms. Marlowe, what a pleasure to finally meet in person. Your work in Bali was revolutionary." Victoria managed to hide her surprise. "Mr. Harrington, the pleasure's mine. The Marlowe Foundation's water purification initiative, truly groundbreaking," Harrington continued enthusiastically. "And your recent education programs in Madagascar. I've been following them with great interest." As Harrington launched into detailed questions about projects Victoria had never heard of, she found herself able to answer confidently thanks to the comprehensive briefing materials Harrison had made her memorize that afternoon. Across the room, Cordelia watched in growing frustration as Victoria charmed not only Harrington, but several other humanitarian leaders Cordelia had invited specifically to expose her. During a brief moment alone, Victoria whispered to Atlas, "How did you pull this off?" Atlas typed quickly, "Harrison has been making calls all day. Amazing what people remember when a $10 million donation is mentioned." Victoria shook her head, in astonishment. "You're spending a fortune to maintain this charade." Atlas's expression was unreadable as he typed, "Worth every penny to see Cordelia's face right now." The evening progressed like a dream, with Victoria playing her part flawlessly. She danced with Atlas, his hand warm against hers, his steps perfectly in rhythm with her own. For someone who didn't speak, he communicated remarkably well through touch, through glances, through the subtle pressure of his fingers against her waist. "Everyone's watching us," Victoria murmured as they swayed to the music. Atlas nodded, slightly, then pulled her closer, his chest solid against hers. He typed one-handed on his phone without breaking their dance. "They should be. You're outshining everyone here." Victoria felt herself blush. That's very smooth for a man who supposedly avoids romance. Atlas's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement, or might have been something deeper. He slipped his phone away and signed slowly so she could understand. Not avoiding, waiting for something real. Before Victoria could process this, Cordelia appeared with a photographer from the society pages. "Just one photo of the happy couple?" she asked, her smile tight. Atlas nodded, turning Victoria to face the camera. But instead of a formal pose, he surprised everyone by leaning down to press his lips gently against Victoria's temple, his eyes closed in a gesture of such apparent devotion that the photographer gasped in delight. "Perfect," the photographer exclaimed. "Mr. Sterling clearly adores you, Ms. Marlowe." Victoria felt dizzy, and not from the champagne. Atlas's unexpected display of affection had seemed so genuine that for a moment, she'd forgotten it was all pretend. As the gala wound down, Victoria escaped to a balcony overlooking the gardens, needing air and perspective. This charade was becoming dangerously convincing, even to her. "You play your part well," came a voice behind her. Victoria turned to find Cordelia, holding 2 champagne flutes. She offered one to Victoria, who hesitated before accepting. "Thank you," Victoria said cautiously. "Don't thank me yet," Cordelia replied, leaning against the balcony rail. "I still don't believe you're who you claim to be." Victoria sipped her champagne, maintaining her composure. "Your opinion doesn't concern me." "It should," Cordelia said quietly. "Because while Atlas may have created a foundation overnight, he can't fabricate your past completely. Someone with your talents must have left traces." Victoria's grip tightened on her glass. "What do you want?" "Cordelia?" "To protect my family's company," Cordelia replied simply. "Atlas is brilliant, but vulnerable. His condition makes him an easy target for someone willing to exploit it." "You don't know anything about him," Victoria said, genuine, anger flaring. "Or about us." Cordelia smiled thinly. "Perhaps not, but I do know desperation when I see it. And you, Victoria Marlowe, or whatever your real name is, reek of it." "Is everything all right?" Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her shrewd gaze taking in the scene. "Just girl talk, grandmother," Cordelia said smoothly. "I was telling Victoria how happy we all are to welcome her to the family." Eleanor didn't look convinced. "Victoria, dear, Atlas is looking for you. Something about a surprise." Grateful for the escape, Victoria nodded. As she passed Eleanor, the older woman grasped her arm gently. "Be careful with my grandson's heart," she whispered. "Silent waters run deep." Returning to the ballroom, Victoria found Atlas waiting by the grand staircase. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted. A softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. He held out his hand, and despite her confusion, Victoria took it without hesitation. "Come with me," he signed. "There's something I want to show you." As he led her away from the crowd, Victoria tried to remind herself that this was all an elaborate performance. The dress, the ring, the tender glances. So why did her heart race when he looked at her? And why, when his fingers intertwined with hers, did it feel like the only real thing in a night of beautiful lies? Atlas led Victoria through the labyrinth of the Sterling mansion, past priceless artwork, and through corridors she hadn't yet explored. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors, then softened as they transitioned to plush carpet, and finally fell silent as Atlas pushed open a set of heavy oak doors. "Oh," Victoria breathed, stepping into what could only be described as a sanctuary of words. The library rose 3 stories high, with spiraling staircases connecting balconies lined with thousands of books. The ceiling was a glass dome that revealed the night sky, stars twinkling above like distant diamonds. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across comfortable leather chairs and antique reading tables. "This is incredible," she whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Atlas watched her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. He moved to a specific shelf, running his fingers along leather spines until he found what he was looking for. He pulled down a large, leather-bound volume and carried it to a table near the fire. "My grandfather's favorite spot," he signed, gesturing for Victoria to sit in one of the wingback chairs. As Victoria settled into the buttery leather, Atlas opened the book, revealing not pages, but a hollow center containing an ornate wooden box. He carefully removed it, then knelt before Victoria, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. Victoria's heart thundered in her chest. "Atlas?" He opened the box, revealing a ring that made her engagement diamond seem modest in comparison. Not in size. This ring's stone was smaller, but in presence. The antique band held an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, the setting delicate, yet unmistakably valuable. "It's beautiful," Victoria said softly, "but I already have an engagement ring." Atlas shook his head, then pulled out his phone and typed, "This was my grandmother's. It's the real Sterling family ring, passed down for generations. The one you're wearing was purchased for our arrangement." Victoria stared at him, confusion swirling in her mind. "I don't understand." Atlas set the ring box on the table and typed, again, his fingers moving rapidly. "I had a different ring made for our contract marriage. This one has meaning. History. Eleanor asked me tonight if I'd given it to you yet. She assumes I would give the family ring to the woman I truly love." Victoria felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her. "Why are you showing me this now?" Atlas's jaw worked, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. He typed, "Because I've made a terrible mistake." Victoria's stomach dropped. "You want to call off the wedding?" It wasn't a question. After all, their arrangement had been a business decision, nothing more. The fact that her heart was currently shattering was her problem, not his. Atlas looked startled, then shook his head vigorously. He typed again. "No. The mistake was treating you, like a business transaction." Victoria stared at him, afraid to hope, afraid to believe what he seemed to be saying. "I don't want a contract wife," he continued typing. "I want you, the real you. Not because of the company bylaws or my grandmother's wishes, but because these past days have shown me what I've been missing." Victoria's voice was barely audible. "But you don't even know the real me." Atlas's expression softened. He typed, "I know you cry at dog commercials. You sleep like a starfish. You're terrified of heights but love roller coasters. You learn sign language in 3 hours to surprise me. You defend me to Cordelia when you think I can't hear. You understand the value of silence. I know enough." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "My whole life is a lie, Atlas. Even my name. I'm not Victoria Marlowe. I'm Sophia Collins, community college dropout, failed actress, professional con artist. The woman you think you know doesn't exist." She expected him to recoil, to look disgusted, or betrayed. Instead, he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his face, and typed, "I know. I've known since before I approached you at the gala." Victoria, or rather, Sophia, froze. "What?" He typed, "When I said I'd done research on you, I meant thorough research. I know about Sophia Collins. I know about the foster care. The scholarship you lost when your drama professor took credit for your play. The first con you ran to pay your roommate's medical bills. I know who you are. Beyond the lies. Sophia felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Why would you choose someone like me then, if you knew the truth? Atlas typed slowly, deliberately. Because I needed someone who understood what it means to wear a mask, to live behind a facade. I've been Atlas Sterling, brilliant mute billionaire. For so long I sometimes forget who I was before the accident. You're the first person who sees past that. He set his phone down, then raised his hands to sign words she somehow understood without translation. You see me. The real me. Sophia wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. This is insane. You can't possibly want to marry me now that you know the truth. Atlas picked up his phone again. I want it more. No contract, no time limit. Just us, building something real from all these beautiful lies. He reached for the antique ring box, then hesitated, his eyes questioning. Sophia laughed through her tears. You're asking a con woman with a fake identity to marry a mute billionaire for real? That sounds like the plot of a bad romantic comedy. Atlas's eyes crinkled, and he typed, or a good one, depending on the ending. Before she could respond, the library door burst open. Cordelia stood in the doorway, triumph written across her face. Sorry to interrupt this touching scene, she said, but I thought you'd want to know that the board has called an emergency meeting. It seems someone provided them with evidence that your fiancée is actually Sophia Collins, wanted in 3 states for fraud. Atlas stood, positioning himself between Cordelia and Sophia. Cordelia smiled coldly. Don't worry, cousin. I've arranged for the police to wait until after the wedding. Wouldn't want to disappoint grandmother, would we? As she turned to leave, Atlas's hands moved in a flurry of signs so rapid that Sophia couldn't follow. Cordelia froze, then slowly turned back. You wouldn't dare. Atlas nodded once, his expression resolute. What did he say? Sophia asked. Cordelia's smile had vanished. He said if I pursue this, he'll reveal what really happened to the Singapore project funds. Apparently my creative accounting hasn't gone unnoticed. She straightened her shoulders. Fine. Keep your con artist bride. But when this blows up in your face, don't expect me to help pick up the pieces. After she left, Sophia turned to Atlas in amazement. You're blackmailing your cousin to protect me? Atlas shrugged, then typed, family tradition. Besides, she's actually good at her job when she's not plotting coups. Sophia laughed incredulously. This is madness. Atlas nodded in agreement, then typed, Welcome to the Sterlings. Dysfunction and dynasty in equal measure. He hesitated, then added, You don't have to stay. I can clear your record, give you a new start. No strings. Sophia studied him in the firelight. This silent man who communicated more honestly than anyone she'd ever known, who saw past her lies to the truth she'd spent years hiding, who offered her freedom even as he hoped she'd stay. What about the company? She asked. The bylaws? Atlas typed, There are other ways. Grandmother would understand. And your perfect society wedding? Your grandmother's dying wish? His expression grew serious. He typed, I'd rather have a real marriage to Sophia Collins than a fake one to Victoria Marlowe. Sophia's breath caught. No one had ever chosen her, the real her, over a more convenient alternative. You know, she said slowly, I've spent my whole life being whoever people wanted me to be. The perfect foster child, the talented student, the sophisticated socialite. I'm not sure I even know who Sophia Collins is anymore. Atlas took her hand, placing it over his heart. He signed slowly. Then we'll discover her together. With trembling fingers, Sophia reached for the antique ring box, I can't promise to be perfect. I've spent too long lying to people. Atlas typed, I don't want perfect. I want real, even the messy parts. And your grandmother? What will we tell her about Victoria Marlowe? Atlas smiled and typed, that Victoria was a role you played, but Sophia is who you are. She'll love the romance of it. Trust me. Sophia laughed, the sound both terrified and exhilarated. So we're really doing this? Getting married for real? Instead of answering with words, Atlas cupped her face in his hands and leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in their first kiss. In the silence, with the stars shining through the glass dome above and the fire crackling beside them, he told her everything she needed to know without uttering a single word. 1 year later. Darling, have you seen my notes for the foundation? Presentation, Sophia called out, rushing through their New York penthouse in stockinged feet, her hair half done. Atlas appeared from his office, holding up a tablet with her speech already loaded. He handed it to her with a kiss on her forehead, his eyes crinkling with affection. Right here. You left it in the kitchen while making coffee. You're a lifesaver, she sighed, accepting both the tablet and the kiss. Their first year of marriage had been anything but conventional. Eleanor had been delighted by the romantic twist of Atlas falling for the real woman behind Victoria's facade. The board had grudgingly accepted Sophia after Atlas threatened to sell his shares and start a rival company, and Cordelia had eventually made peace with her cousin's wife, especially after Sophia used her considerable talents for deception to help negotiate a tricky merger. The Marlowe Foundation, originally created as a cover story, had become Sophia's passion project. Using Atlas's initial donation and her unique perspective on what it meant to reinvent oneself, she'd created programs for foster children aging out of the system, giving them education and opportunities she'd never had. As for Atlas, watching his wife transform from professional liar to philanthropic force had been the greatest joy of his silent life. Do you ever regret it? Sophia asked suddenly, pausing in her preparations. Atlas raised an eyebrow in question. Marrying me, taking a chance on someone who made an art out of deception. Atlas smiled and signed, best business decision I ever made. Sophia laughed and swatted his arm. He caught her hand and pulled her close, typing one-handed on his phone. And the best personal one. As Sophia rested her head against his chest, she marveled at how a contract built on mutual dishonesty had somehow led to the most honest relationship of her life. With Atlas, she'd finally found someone who didn't need her to pretend, who valued her precisely because she'd stopped performing. In the silence between them, a silence that had once seemed like a barrier but now felt like their most intimate connection, Sophia realized what real love was. Not grand declarations or perfect romance, but the choice to see someone completely and stay anyway. Atlas brushed a strand of hair from her face and signed 3 simple words she'd learned on their wedding night. I love you. 3 words he would never speak aloud, but communicated more genuinely than anyone she'd ever known. Sophia signed back, the movement now as natural as breathing. I love you too. No lies. Atlas's eyes crinkled at the corners, his version of laughter, as he signed again. No lies. Just us. And in the quiet of their shared life, that was all that needed to be said. Eleanor Sterling lived another 5 years, long enough to hold her great-grandchild, a blue-eyed girl with her father's quiet intensity and her mother's quick wit. Cordelia eventually became COO of Sterling Innovations, channeling her ambition into growth rather than conquest. Harrison remained Atlas's trusted right hand, though he drew the line at babysitting. And Atlas and Sophia, they built a life on the foundation of that strange contract. A life filled with success and failure, joy and sorrow. But most importantly, truth. Atlas never spoke again, but in the language they created together, part sign, part touch, part silent understanding, He and Sophia said everything that mattered. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room, others with a chance encounter in the rain. Theirs began with a business proposition and an explosion of champagne. But perhaps that's the secret of great love stories. They rarely start the way you expect, and they never end the way you planned. And sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones never spoken aloud.